Hey, welcome back. One of the challenges, it wasn't too bad, but one of the challenges was finding a longer rear shock to mount up on this because the Urban Express shock is way too short. Let me grab one. So here's your stock Urban Express shock, which is about at least 6 or 7 or 8 inches, way too short. And then this is actually a Cvt shock, but I think it's the same length as the Express shock. And this is 3 or 4 inches too short. Now I have these shock extender things. But even with 2 of those, it wasn't going to work, and it was kind of a cheesy solution. So, and at the time I didn't even have a front tire or the forks on. I just kind of had the frame on the engine, and I had the frame on a stand to kind of balance it. And I took the measurement where I thought the seat should be, and it was like 15 inches. And I ordered this. It's a 15-inch shock. I forget the millimeters, like 380 or, yeah, I think it's 380 millimeters. And my other concern was, you know, it's wider, not only taller, but wider than the average shock or the stock shock. And it's got that air chamber in the front, where really it should be in the back. And so I had several worries as I was waiting to receive this, and I had to order a pair of them because they only came in pairs. This is for a motorcycle, not a moped or noped. And I guess my third concern would be is this going to be too soft, because it's normally meant to be installed in pairs. So is one going to be too soft? And but whatever. I spent the money. It was on its way. You know, I figured, well, I could always return it, I guess, and give it a shot. And then while I was waiting on it, I'm like, man, did I take that measurement right? I think the shock's going to be too long. The back tire is going to be sitting on the ground when it's on the center stand. And I finally got it and installed it. And it was really soft. I mean, the rack would almost hit the tire if I really bounced on it hard. And then when I added the rear fender, the rack would hit the rear fender a little bit. And I guess luckily when I installed the shock, the rear tire did come up off the ground. You can adjust it down here, but when I received it, it was already adjusted to its shortest length. You can make it longer. I'm not sure how far, by at least 1 inch, I would imagine. And then, so I installed it, and the rear tire was fine. It actually turned out pretty well. The mounting here and there are a little offset, so it's like a couple millimeters away from perfect, because that side sits out farther than that. And I tried to space it with washers as best I could, and I couldn't get it perfect, but it's pretty close. And then I mounted it. Normally this chamber goes on the other side, but the rack got in the way, and I mounted it there. And then you've got a couple adjustments. You can adjust this spring tension down. I've got it adjusted all the way down here, so you have less travel in the suspension. And then you can actually add compressed air to this to a little over like 72.5 psi. I've only got it at like 25 now, but I can increase that, I think, to get a little more less soft of a ride. And with this suspension, the seat sits up a little higher than on a normal Express. It used to sink down when I hadn't adjusted the suspension. But you sit a little bit higher, which is a little different, kind of cool. And you realize what a complete toy the regular Express is with those child shocks, the rear shock. And of course the front shock seems like a complete child's toy when you've got this massive beefy rear shock on the back. If I had a similar suspension setup in the front, I mean, of course the tires are kind of small, but I guess that would be the limiting point. I was about to say you could ride through a minefield without much of a problem, but you still got the small tires, but it makes a huge difference in the ride. And so I've got an extra one now. And enough about the shock. What else? And then, you know, the real advantage of the Urban over the regular Express is the Cvt Drive System, which allows you to adjust several components where none of these things are adjustable in the chain drive regular Express. And here is really your key to speed. Of course, you can make adjustments with the variator weights. You can notch, window, or hog out the variator to make the belt ride up higher on the front pulley and lower on the rear pulley. You have several different belt choices, at least probably a half a dozen to make. You can upgrade the clutch. This has the GY6 clutch with the red springs and a gray 1600 RPM contra spring. And then finally, you can adjust the final gearing in the very back, which I did with the Malossi gears. And I don't know, I had the box around here somewhere, but basically that gives you a, I guess what do you want to say, a taller rear gear, is that right? But anyways, of course my problem I ran into with adding those was I've got this tiny stock 50cc engine which is already limited, and in order to turn that new gear I've got to create enough power to do it. And so actually increasing the compression seems to have helped out a little bit, and I'll experiment with that further and see how far I can go with the stock cylinder in terms of, you know, final top speed. Low end is not great, especially from a dead stop. You have to get going a few miles an hour before things kick in, even with the red springs on the clutch. Of course, I've got the BX31 belt with the washer. Didn't have an extra Malossi belt. I'm just going to pronounce it Malossi. You know, I don't care anymore. Malossi, whatever. So, you know, that is the real advantage. And this system is a real balancing act. You know, you can change the weights in the variator, but you know, that's going to affect. It's a system. You know, you got the variator weights, you've got the belt, you've got the clutch, you got the contra spring, you got the springs in the clutch, you got the final gear if you want. And so to balance, if you're going to change all of those things, you've got to, you know, balance out everything. And usually anything you do back here, the clutch or the gears, is going to affect the variator up here. And anything you do in the variator is going to be affected by or will affect anything back here. So you've got to balance. If you make a change here, you probably have to make a change here. If you make a change in the final gearing back here, then you probably have to change stuff up here. If you make a change in the clutch with the contra spring or even the clutch springs, you probably have to make a change up here. And you change the belt, you know. So you want to balance. It's a balancing act, and your final goal is to get the best acceleration and keep your top end speed. Of course, if you add the final gearing, then it's also get the best top end with the best acceleration. And that is going to affect your acceleration throughout the system. was I thinking? And of course, you know, if you get too much of a gearing in here, then you've got to go back to the engine, get more power out of the engine to get this perfectly balanced. And then, so now you're balancing that with the engine, you know, and the whole system is a balancing act, really. And, you know, one other thing you can do is this is an 80-90 tire, 14-inch tire. You can also change the final gearing by putting on a taller tire. Could just be a 90-90 14-inch tire. Or you could go up to a 16-inch tire if you want to go through the hassle of, you know, relacing the hub. You know, I guess you got to put the 16-inch spokes on the rear hub on a front rim, which seems like a lot of work. And then, you know, the problem with that, I've talked to a guy out of Michigan who did all this, and he said the problem is you end up breaking spokes like crazy, especially if you've got an engine that puts out a lot of torque. So I really think the best bang for your buck is just to go to the biggest 14-inch tire you can get, which is probably a 90-90 16. Actually, I put one on my other Urban Express, and even though it's still a 14-inch tire, it's a taller tire than the 80-millimeter tire. The wider a tire, the taller it usually is if the aspect ratio stays the same, I would think. And the 90-90 tire is a taller tire because I've done it. And it definitely changes the way the bike performs. And maybe I'll get back into that bike later this winter. I need to do that. Because what I'm probably going to do is take the VM18 off of that bike and put it on this one. I guess I got big plans. Okay, finally, excuse me. I'll tell you what, let's take the seat off and look under the seat.